What if the most dangerous weapons ever created weren't forged from steel, but written in ink? For centuries, whispers spoke of books so forbidden, so terrifying, that even to read them was to gamble with your soul. These weren't fairy tales or dusty relics. They were satanic grimoires, manuals of power, pacts, and rituals hidden from the world for a reason. Imagine opening a page and finding not wisdom, but instructions for summoning demons, signing infernal contracts, and walking a razor's edge between salvation and damnation. This is why the most terrifying satanic grimoires, explained in obsessive detail, isn't just a story. It's a descent into the black heart of humanity's obsession with forbidden knowledge, from the Grand Grimoire to the Devil's Bible, from Lucifuge Rofocale to the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia. These occult manuscripts weren't myths. They were roadmaps for those who dared to cross the line. And the shocking truth is that many did. Some sought wealth, others knowledge, and a few simply craved the thrill of summoning what should never be called. So stay with me, because once you step into these pages, you'll never look at books the same way again. And what you're about to discover may change forever, how you think about power, temptation, and the shadows that still whisper from the past. The first thing most people overlook is that danger doesn't always roar. It often whispers. Imagine a book sitting quietly on a dusty shelf, yet inside its pages lies the weight of centuries of fear, desire, and forbidden rituals. These aren't ordinary texts. They are satanic grimoires, occult manuscripts that promise knowledge and power, but demand something far greater in return. To the untrained eye, they might look like medieval grimoires with strange ink and fragile parchment, but to those who dare open them, the experience is like stepping into a room where shadows lean closer, waiting to see if you'll read the next line. That's the whisper of forbidden books, the promise that something you should never know is waiting for you. People throughout history have been seduced by that whisper. From the Grand Grimoire to Le Dragon Rouge, the allure was never simply about spells or demonic invocation. It was about forbidden knowledge. The idea that one could hold secrets meant only for the hidden worlds. Have you ever felt that strange pull when told not to do something? The very prohibition makes it irresistible. That's the same hunger that pushed seekers to dig into the Devil's Bible, the Codex Diabolicus, or the Grimoire Verum. They wanted to taste what others feared, to open the gates everyone else kept locked shut. That's the paradox. The louder society shouted "don't," the stronger the whisper became. These whispers often came wrapped in mystery. Unlike modern books with glossy covers, satanic grimoires appeared in strange forms, handwritten with cryptic sigils, sometimes smeared with blood, sometimes protected by infernal seals. They weren't meant for the masses. They were gateways reserved for those who believed they could survive the dangers of forbidden rituals. Imagine being handed a key to a door you've never seen before. Would you turn it? That hesitation, that inner debate, is exactly the hook that kept seekers staring at these black magic books long after their candles burned out. But the whisper wasn't just about curiosity. It carried the weight of temptation, promises of contact with the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia, pacts with Lucifuge Rofocale, or hidden paths to summon Baal, Astaroth, and Asmodeus. It told its readers, you can control what others fear. And for a desperate man in the Middle Ages, crushed by plague, poverty, or persecution, such promises felt like lifelines. Some believed the holy guardian angel ritual in the Book of Abramelin would elevate them, while others dove straight into devil summoning, thinking they could bend chaos to their will. In both cases, the whisper was never neutral. It demanded a price. If you've ever held an old book and felt a chill run down your spine, you've already tasted a fragment of what those seekers felt. Except their books weren't filled with fairy tales. They contained demonic pacts, detailed instructions for summoning infernal entities, and dark occult philosophy disguised as sacred knowledge. A candle flicker, a mistranslated word, a broken circle of protection. These weren't small mistakes. They were gateways left wide open. To them, reading wasn't safe. It was playing chess against an opponent you couldn't see, one who didn't just want to win, but to own the player entirely. In the end, the whisper of forbidden books was never about ink on paper. It was about transformation, about daring to step into places where others feared to look. The Grand Grimoire didn't just instruct, it tested. The Codex Diabolicus wasn't just copied, it demanded. These texts whispered promises, but also wove traps. And those who thought they were reading in silence were, in truth, being read themselves. Every turn of the page was a step deeper into an agreement they didn't fully understand, a slow weaving of the self into the fabric of something darker. The danger wasn't just what they could summon, it was what they would become. Yet this whisper wasn't isolated. It grew louder as humanity evolved, passed along from ancient Mesopotamian tablets to the medieval scribes who risked damnation by copying occult manuscripts. The same impulse that drove men to study the stars or map the oceans also drove others to chart the invisible mu, to write down the unspeakable. Think about it. Every great discovery of science or philosophy has its shadow twin in the hidden world of black magic books. For every sacred prayer, there was an opposite, a forbidden spell. And the seekers didn't see themselves as evil, only as explorers charting dangerous seas. What they didn't realize was that the tide they followed was pulling them towards something darker than water. And so, the whisper of forbidden pages became a chorus, echoing through history, growing stronger with each generation that dared to defy the warning. These weren't isolated curiosities. They were threads in a larger tapestry of secret occult societies, where the lust for power mixed with witchcraft texts and hidden teachings. And if the whisper of one book could shake a man's soul, imagine the shadows born when entire collections of satanic grimoires converged. That, my friend, leads us to the roots. The shadows of ancient knowledge that shaped civilizations in ways we're only beginning to understand. Long before the Grand Grimoire or the Devil's Bible ever appeared, humanity was already chasing whispers of the invisible. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets carried incantations meant to ward off spirits, while in Egypt, priests filled scrolls with forbidden rituals that blurred the line between prayer and black magic books. These were not random experiments. They were humanity's first attempts to speak directly to what they couldn't see. The shadows of ancient knowledge weren't just about control, but survival. When floods came or crops failed, people turned not to science, there was none yet, but to forbidden books. Believing demons and gods alike held the answers. And so, what later became medieval grimoires had roots older than empires. Picture a Babylonian scribe carving sigils into clay by torchlight, convinced that every stroke held the power to summon or repel. He wasn't thinking about witchcraft texts as entertainment. This was life or death. The same shadows moved across Greece, where philosophers debated whether diamonds were guides or deceivers, and across Israel, where mystical writings hinted at angelic and demonic invocation. Each culture added layers to the hidden library of occult manuscripts. And isn't it striking that even without knowing each other, civilizations all leaned toward the same dangerous idea, that words, symbols, and rituals could bend unseen forces to human will. This universal hunger is what makes satanic grimoires so haunting. They didn't appear from nowhere. They were the culmination of humanity's oldest gamble, but with every ancient discovery came the same paradox. Was this sacred or profane? Egyptians used the Book of the Dead as a guide through the afterlife, yet fragments inside feel more like a Lucifer grimoire than a holy text. Hebrew mystics practiced the holy guardian angel ritual centuries before it was formalized in the Book of Abramelin. Meanwhile, Mesopotamian tablets contain spells for healing, but side by side, instructions for devil summoning. The line was never clear. To a desperate farmer, a protective charm and a demonic pact were separated only by intent. That blurry boundary is what gave rise to later medieval grimoires, where every page walked a razor's edge between salvation and damnation. Think of it like modern technology. A knife can cut bread or spill blood. Electricity can light a home or destroy it. The ancients didn't separate occult knowledge from survival. They simply used what worked. If a ritual to Baal promised rain, why not try it? If invoking Astaroth could bring insight into the stars, wasn't that as valid as watching the sky? That's how forbidden books became embedded in culture. They weren't satanic rituals explained in today's sense. They were practical tools, shadowy but effective, and in their success, they became irresistible. The seeds of the Ars Goetia and its 72 demons were already germinating long before Solomon's seal was ever drawn. These shadows also carried a strange sense of prestige. In Egypt, priests guarded their occult manuscripts like treasures, while in Babylon, scribes became gatekeepers of forbidden rituals. Knowledge itself was a form of power, and those who held it often became advisors to kings, rulers, or armies. Imagine standing in a dark temple, the air heavy with incense, as a priest chants words passed down from centuries past. That wasn't theater. It was politics, survival, and influence. And just like today's secret occult societies, the ancients understood that power wasn't only about armies or gold. It was about who controlled the unseen. That belief didn't fade. It transformed, mutating into the medieval grimoires that would terrify Europe for centuries. What's fascinating is how echoes of those early practices still linger. The Codex Diabolicus, or Devil's Bible, didn't invent fear, it compiled it. The Book of Abramelin didn't start the quest for angelic guidance, it refined it. Even the Grimoire Verum and Le Dragon Rouge, infamous for their ties to Lucifuge Rofocal, can be traced back to rituals and philosophies first whispered thousands of years ago. Every black magic book we fear today carries shadows of ancient knowledge, and those shadows aren't silent, they echo, reminding us that humanity has always been willing to risk damnation for even a glimpse of forbidden truth. When you think about it, these ancient roots explain why grimoires never feel like isolated texts. They're more like rivers, fed by countless underground streams, Mesopotamian chants, Egyptian scrolls, Hebrew mysticism, Greek daimonology, all flowing together until they spill into the books we now call the most terrifying grimoires. The shadows of ancient knowledge shaped every page, every sigil, every demonic invocation. And if the ancients laid the foundation, it was in medieval Europe where those shadows took on a terrifying new form, when the birth of the grimoire tradition exploded into something darker than ever before. By the time Europe stepped into the medieval age, the whispers of forbidden books had already become a roaring undercurrent. The hunger for occult knowledge didn't disappear, it crystallized. Out of monasteries, secret libraries, and shadowy circles came the first grimoires that we recognize today. Unlike the scattered tablets of Mesopotamia or scrolls of Egypt, these medieval grimoires were deliberate manuals, step-by-step guides for forbidden rituals, demonic invocation, and even holy rites twisted into something darker. The Key of Solomon, the Grimoire of Pope Honorius, and later the Grimoirium Verum weren't accidental collections. They were structured, almost like recipe books, for those bold or desperate enough to follow their instructions. What made this birth so terrifying was its precision. These black magic books didn't simply say, pray to a spirit or call upon a demon. They mapped it out, circles of protection, infernal seals, exact words to summon Baal, Astaroth, or Asmodeus, and detailed timing under the stars. Imagine someone today being handed a manual titled, How to Hack the Universe. Wouldn't they at least peek inside? That's what these seekers felt when they stumbled across satanic grimoires. The instructions weren't vague, they were technical, practical, and incredibly dangerous if misapplied. It wasn't just superstition anymore, it was systematic. One fascinating paradox was how religion and rebellion intertwined here. Many of these grimoires borrowed directly from sacred texts. Latin prayers were reconfigured as spells. Angelic names stood side by side with demonic ones. The Book of Abramelin, for example, introduced the Holy Guardian Angel ritual, but hidden within the same pages were hints of demonic pacts. The Church condemned these occult manuscripts, yet ironically, many scribes and monks were the very ones copying them. It's like a preacher warning against fire, while secretly keeping a torch under his robes. This tension between the sacred and the profane is what gave birth to some of the most terrifying grimoires ever written. And then there were the promises. These books didn't merely threaten damnation. They promised rewards, wealth, love, revenge, knowledge, even glimpses of immortality. Le Dragon Rouge spoke of Lucifuge Rofocal as a gateway to riches, while the Grand Grimoire became infamous for instructions on binding Lucifer himself. Whether those promises were real or illusion almost didn't matter. The sheer possibility was enough to drive seekers into candle-lit rooms, drawing sigils on the floor, whispering forbidden rituals under their breath. It's not so different from gamblers today. Most know the odds are against them, but the chance of winning lures them in. Except here, the game was played with forces far more unforgiving than dice. These grimoires also marked the birth of a culture of secrecy. Unlike open philosophy, Occult knowledge was guarded fiercely, passed only to those initiated in secret occult societies or proven loyal. Have you ever noticed how something restricted instantly feels more valuable? That's the psychology behind these texts. A black market of witchcraft texts thrived, spreading from France to Italy, from monasteries to wandering magicians. Each new hand-copied version carried errors, additions, and personal twists. And with each twist, the danger grew, like playing a game of telephone with instructions that could summon demons instead of delivering a harmless joke. What's even more striking is how these grimoires mirrored the times. In an age of plague, famine few, and endless wars, the promise of control over chaos was irresistible. Imagine watching your family starve, then being told that by invoking one of the 72 demons from the Ars Goetia, you might alter your fate. Wouldn't you at least consider it? That's why these forbidden books spread like wildfire. They weren't entertainment. They were survival tools, desperate measures in desperate times. To the people of that era, opening a Lucifer grimoire wasn't about curiosity. It was about clawing back some measure of hope, even if it meant bargaining with shadows. And yet, every page came with risk. These occult manuscripts taught more than spells. They taught surrender. Once you performed the ritual, once you stepped into the circle, there was no guarantee you could step back out unchanged. Medieval grimoires didn't just instruct, they initiated. Those who touched them carried the weight of unseen eyes, the sense that once the ink left the page and entered the air, it would never truly vanish. The very act of reading was already an invocation. And as the birth of the grimoire tradition took hold, Europe entered an era where black magic books weren't just whispered about, they were feared as weapons, as dangerous as any sword. From here, things only deepened. The grimoires grew darker, the rituals more elaborate, and the stories of sacrifices more chilling. If the birth of the tradition showed how grimoires could structure forbidden knowledge, the next stage would reveal just how bloody and ritualistic those structures became, because when ink mixed with blood and words turned into circles of fire, the grimoire stopped being just a book and became a battlefield. That's where we step into the black mass of ink and blood. Once grimoires were born, they no longer stayed confined to ink and parchment. They became blueprints for ritual, and these weren't harmless ceremonies. They demanded structure, the circle of protection, the sacred triangle, candles placed with precision, and infernal seals carved with trembling hands. This was the era when black magic books turned into instruction manuals for the black mass of ink and blood. The seeker wasn't just reading anymore, he was performing. Stepping inside a stage where the audience was invisible, but very real. The Grimoirium Verum, the Grand Grimoire, and Le Dragon Rouge became more than texts. They became scripts for encounters that left men either empowered or destroyed. Picture a medieval room lit only by candles, with chalk lines covering the floor. A man whispers forbidden rituals from a Lucifer grimoire, his voice cracking as he calls on Astaroth or Asmodeus. He sprinkles blood into the circle, convinced this act will protect him from the forces he's summoning. Yet the irony is chilling. The very symbols meant to shield him are also gates, portals carved by language itself. That's the paradox of these occult manuscripts. The tools of protection were inseparable from the tools of invitation. You weren't just reading about devil summoning. You were building the doorway with every stroke of ink, every drop of blood. It's tempting to think these rituals were just superstition. But imagine the psychological power they held. When a desperate man believed that summoning Baal could change his fortune, the very act of the ritual altered his state of mind. His fear, his hope, his trembling faith all fed the experience. And if something unexplainable happened, a sudden gust of wind, a candle flickering out, it only deepened the conviction that the grimoire worked. This is why Satanic grimoires held such terrifying influence. They turned belief into theater, and theater into reality. In that charged space, the line between imagination and demonic invocation was razor thin. Blood always played a role in these forbidden books. It wasn't just symbolic, it was currency. The Grand Grimoire speaks of sacrifices, while the Book of Abramelin hints at offerings needed to contact the holy guardian angel. Blood was seen as life itself, condensed energy, powerful enough to feed or bargain with the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia. Think of it as the most ancient form of contract signing, except the ink was red and the clauses were eternal. Those who shed it weren't merely practicing rituals, they were binding themselves into demonic pacts, sometimes without even realizing what they had agreed to. One haunting detail is how these grimoires blended the sacred with the profane. Many rituals began with prayers, psalms, or invocations of angels, only to twist midway into calls to Lucifuge Rofocale or infernal legions. It's as if the writers wanted to reassure the seeker with holy words, then drag them deeper into the abyss with satanic rituals explained in obsessive detail. This fusion made the books all the more dangerous. You weren't just dealing with witchcraft texts, you were stepping into dark occult philosophy that blurred good and evil, heaven and hell. And once you blurred that line, could you ever step back to innocence again? The black mass of ink and blood also revealed the secret language of grimoires. Symbols, circles, pentagrams, triangles, and sigils weren't mere drawings. They were infernal seals, each believed to tether or command a specific entity. Think of them as the passwords of the medieval world. Just as a hacker today needs precise code, a magician then needed the exact seal for Astaroth or the correct sigil for Asmodeus. A single mistake, a crooked line, a misspelled word was believed to invite disaster. That tension is what made these forbidden books the most terrifying grimoires. You weren't just reading, you were gambling your soul on precision. And yet, as dangerous as these rituals were, they spread. Across Europe, whispered accounts told of secret occult societies performing the Black Mass, mixing holy rites with forbidden practices, and using these occult manuscripts as their Bibles. They became the foundation of a dark underground tradition, hidden in plain sight. And while many feared even the sight of a Lucifer grimoire, others sought them out, desperate for power. But the deeper you went, the darker the texts became. And that's where the shadows led to something even more chilling. Grimoires so infamous, so terrifying, that their very names were spoken like curses. Which brings us to the Codex Diabolicus. When people speak of the darkest of forbidden books, they often imagine a single monstrous volume, a Codex Diabolicus, an infernal collection where satanic grimoires converge into one voice. In reality, this codex isn't just a myth. It represents the way humanity gathered its most terrifying grimoires into a lineage. Think of the Grand Grimoire, Le Dragon Rouge, and the Grimoirium Verum not as isolated works but as chapters of the same Devil's Bible. Each one added more detail, more forbidden rituals, more ways to bind or bargain with the unseen. Together, they form a library that feels less like ink on parchment and more like a trap built for the soul. The Grand Grimoire, sometimes called the Lucifer Grimoire, stands out for its audacity. It claimed to teach the summoning of Lucifuge Rofocale, the minister of hell himself, in exchange for wealth and power. Imagine holding such a book, knowing every page whispers a deal that could rewrite your destiny. Would you dare to read it aloud? To the desperate, these occult manuscripts promised salvation through damnation, a paradox almost impossible to resist. They weren't mere witchcraft texts. They were contracts disguised as instructions, each word another thread tying the reader to infernal seals and demonic pacts. Le Dragon Rouge, or the Red Dragon, carried a similar weight. It wasn't just about devil summoning. It was about offering a system, a hierarchy of demons, where power could be negotiated like business. In many ways, it anticipated modern contracts, promises, signatures, obligations. Except here, the signature was often written in blood, and the obligations were eternal. To those who opened it, this book wasn't entertainment. It was a crossroads, and every seeker had to ask, was the reward worth the cost? The chilling answer is that many believed it was. That's why these most terrifying grimoires survived, whispered about, and passed down through secret occult societies. The Grimoirium Verum added its own darkness. Known for practical instructions, it blended prayers with forbidden rituals, presenting demonic invocation in a way almost clinical. It named demons, detailed their powers, and even explained how to summon Astaroth, Baal, or Asmodeus with precision. To modern readers, it might feel like a bizarre handbook, but to those in its time, it was a weapon, sharp, unpredictable, and lethal if mishandled. And much like today's manuals for dangerous technology, the danger wasn't only in the tool itself, but in the arrogance of the one using it. That arrogance is what made forbidden books so alluring and so fatal. Looming over them all was the Codex Gigas, the so-called Devil's Bible. Massive in size, legend says it was written in one night by a monk who sold his soul. Within its pages lies scripture side by side with dark, occult philosophy. Its sheer presence, so large it requires two people to lift, made it a symbol of humanity's obsession with capturing both light and shadow in a single manuscript. Whether fact or legend, the Codex Giga embodied the essence of Satanic grimoires. Knowledge too vast, too heavy, too dangerous for one man to carry, and yet someone always tried. And then there was the Book of Abramelin, less famous for demons, but critical for its holy guardian angel ritual. This wasn't about infernal pacts, but about balance, the idea that one must first know their angel before daring to face the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia. The inclusion of such a text alongside the Grand Grimoire or Le Dragon Rouge highlights the strange duality of occult manuscripts. Not every page was purely satanic, but the combination made the line between salvation and damnation nearly impossible to walk. That's why seekers often stumbled, falling headfirst into the abyss even when chasing light. Together, these works, the Grand Grimoire, Le Dragon Rouge, the Grimoirium Verum, the Devil's Bible, and the Book of Abramelin, created what people feared as the Codex Diabolicus, a shadow library where forbidden knowledge wasn't scattered but compiled, sharpened, and offered like poisoned fruit. And just like Eve in the garden, humanity couldn't resist taking a bite. The result wasn't just fear, but obsession. Because once these books existed, they called to readers across centuries, and that call grew louder as rituals evolved into darker practices where ink and parchment weren't enough anymore. Blood, sacrifice, and secrecy became the new currency. Which leads us to the next shadow, how grimoires turned into living rituals of power, sacrifice, and fear. Once grimoires stopped being silent texts and became living instructions, power required a price, and that price was often sacrifice. The most terrifying grimoires didn't simply list spells, they demanded offerings, blood, incense, animal life, and sometimes even human despair. The Grand Grimoire and Le Dragon Rouge instructed readers to seal their pacts with Lucifuge Rofocal through ritual bloodletting, while the Grimoirium Verum explained how to honor spirits with precise sacrifices. These weren't metaphors, they were contracts in action. Each drop of blood wasn't only a symbol, it was a signature on a demonic pact, binding the seeker to infernal seals carved into the air. Sacrifice was never just about appeasing demons. It was about proving seriousness. Imagine a man in medieval Europe, surrounded by famine and plague, reading a Lucifer grimoire by candlelight. To summon Baal or Astaroth, he had to show the spirits he was willing to give something valuable. To him, a goat, a drop of his own blood, or even hours of sleepless fasting were proof. Think of it like applying for a dangerous job. You don't just walk in unprepared, you prove yourself worthy. In the same way, Satanic grimoires turned sacrifice into a passport, granting entry into forbidden rituals of unimaginable consequence. But sacrifice also exposed a deeper truth. Fear was fuel. The seeker's trembling hands, the pounding of his heart, the terror of crossing lines society had warned against, all of this fed the ritual. Occult manuscripts such as the Devil's Bible and the Book of Abramelin hinted that fear itself was a form of offering, a vibration that attracted entities as strongly as blood did. That's why forbidden books were so effective, not only for their instructions, but for the emotional intensity they created. When fear, hope, and desperation collided, the ritual space became charged, making even the smallest signs, a flicker of light, a cold breeze, feel like undeniable proof of demonic invocation. These rituals of sacrifice weren't always solitary. Secret occult societies began performing them together, magnifying the energy. Imagine a hidden cellar, torches flickering, a group of men chanting words from the Ars Goetia in unison, drawing sigils of the 72 demons across the floor. The shared act created a current, a field of belief so thick that every participant felt the presence of Astaroth or Asmodeus pressing against the room. These weren't theater plays, they were communal gambles with eternity. And the grimoires, those black magic books, were their rule books, dangerous, strict, and unforgiving. The most chilling part is how sacrifice evolved. At first, it was goats, birds, or blood droplets. But whispers tell of seekers who went further, offering human life, whether symbolic or literal, to cement their pacts. While hard evidence is scarce, the persistence of these stories across centuries says something about how people perceived satanic rituals explained within grimoires. They were never safe. They always hinted at escalation, as if the spirits demanded more with each bargain. Like a debt that grows with interest, the cost of forbidden rituals only increased the deeper one went, and for those who gave too much, there was no return. And yet, for all the horror, seekers felt rewarded. Some claimed they saw visions of wealth, others received guidance in battles, and a few even swore they had direct conversations with Lucifer himself. These testimonies, whether true, exaggerated, or delusional, kept the cycle alive. Every story of success fueled the next seeker's hope, and so the rituals of power and sacrifice became embedded in European folklore, inspiring fear among priests and fascination among rebels. To this day, echoes of these sacrifices linger in modern witchcraft texts and occult philosophy, proof that the hunger for power never truly dies. But sacrifice wasn't the end of the journey. Once blood was spilled, the next question was, what exactly had been opened? Were these demons truly appearing, or were seekers falling into illusions crafted by forces beyond comprehension? The grimoires didn't just guide rituals, they shaped perception, convincing the reader that what they saw was real. And that takes us into the next shadow, the visions, apparitions, and encounters that seekers swore were not hallucinations, but face-to-face meetings with the infernal. Once the rituals of power and sacrifice were set in motion, seekers often claimed they saw more than candle smoke. They swore they encountered presences, shapes forming in the shadows, voices speaking through the silence, and eyes staring back from the darkness. Satanic grimoires like the Ars Goetia describe these moments in obsessive detail, giving physical forms to the 72 demons, Baal appearing with the heads of a man, a toad, and a cat, Asmodeus riding a dragon, Astaroth whispering forbidden knowledge from a throne of pestilence. These weren't vague impressions. They were visions that felt as real as flesh and far more terrifying. The Codex Diabolicus, the infamous Devil's Bible, only intensified the legend. Within its massive pages, a drawing of the devil himself stares back at the reader, a chilling reminder that the book was said to have been written in one night by a monk who bargained his soul. Imagine reading that by flickering firelight, then hearing a knock at the door, or a sudden gust of wind extinguishing the flame. To the seeker, these weren't coincidences, they were infernal encounters. That's why these forbidden books weren't just manuscripts, they were portals. And once opened, they couldn't easily be closed. Some encounters were subtle, whispers in dreams, visions during fasting, or strange figures appearing at the corner of sight. Others were violent, scratches on the body, objects moving, or sudden illness. The Grimorium Verum warned that demons test their summoners, often demanding proof of loyalty before granting favors. In modern terms, it's like entering a business deal with someone who smiles while sharpening a knife behind their back. Seekers rarely walked away unchanged. Whether hallucinations, psychological breakdowns, or true infernal presences, the experience was undeniable to them. Once seen, it could never be unseen. Interestingly, not all encounters were filled with terror. Some seekers claimed they gained wisdom, that Lucifer grimoire rituals opened their minds to hidden truths. The Book of Abramelin spoke of angelic guidance balanced against demonic temptation, teaching that visions weren't random, but tests of discipline. A man might see his holy guardian angel after weeks of prayer, only to be confronted by demons demanding submission. The duality was always there, salvation and damnation woven together. These encounters weren't just about summoning demons, they were about facing the mirror of one's own deepest desires and fears. Think of it like staring into a fire. At first, you see only flames, but stare long enough and patterns emerge, faces, movements, stories. That's how visions worked in forbidden rituals. The seeker wasn't just seeing demons in the room, he was seeing reflections of himself magnified through the lens of occult knowledge. Baal didn't only appear as a monstrous figure, he embodied ambition, domination, and hunger. Asmodeus wasn't just a beast, he was lust, greed, and obsession. Every infernal seal was also a mirror, showing the seeker what already lurked within their own soul. These infernal encounters also reinforced the culture of secrecy. A man who swore he spoke with Astaroth couldn't easily share it with a priest without risking execution, so the stories were whispered in secret occult societies, passed like torches from one initiate to the next. Over time, visions became traditions, traditions became doctrines, and doctrines became entire libraries of dark occult philosophy. This is why the most terrifying grimoires never faded. They were fueled not only by fear, but by testimony, and testimony, whether true or false, has power, because to the believer, what was seen in the ritual circle was as real as daylight. And so, the seeker who encountered these infernal visions was never the same. For some, it was the beginning of madness. For others, it was the beginning of mastery. But either way, the grimoires had done their job. They had turned words into realities. The next question wasn't whether demons appeared, but what they demanded in return. And that takes us into the chilling domain of pacts, bargains and contracts, the very heart of the grimoire tradition, where souls were weighed like coins on an infernal scale. If visions were the doorway, then pacts were the lock and key. The most terrifying grimoires didn't just describe how to summon demons, they laid out how to negotiate with them. The Grand Grimoire famously instructed readers on sealing a bargain with Lucifuge Rofocale, binding him through infernal seals and promises of loyalty. Le Dragon Rouge promised wealth and influence in exchange for obedience, while the Grimoirium Verum detailed contracts with Astaroth, Baal and Asmodeus. These weren't vague warnings, they were legalistic, almost bureaucratic agreements, and once signed, whether in ink or in blood, the seeker believed there was no escape. The mechanics of these demonic pacts were chillingly precise. Some texts demanded blood signatures, others required spoken oaths, and many insisted on ritual sacrifices. The Book of Abramelin hinted at balance, first securing the Holy Guardian Angel before daring to make any bargain. But most satanic grimoires focused on the infernal side, tempting the seeker with immediate rewards, power, wealth, or knowledge. It's not hard to see the appeal. Imagine being a poor farmer promised abundance, or a desperate noble promised victory in war. To them, a demonic contract wasn't madness, it was survival, written in the ink of desperation. What made these pacts terrifying was the fine print. Much like modern contracts, what was promised up front often hid consequences. The Grand Grimoire suggested Lucifuge Rofocale would grant riches, but whispered that the soul itself would serve as collateral. The Grimoirium Verum detailed demonic invocation rituals, but warned that failure to honor them would bring ruin. It's the same logic as debt, you borrow now, but the interest is crushing later. That's why forbidden books were feared not only by priests, but also by ordinary people. Everyone knew the story of someone who gained briefly, but lost everything in the end. Interestingly, not all who engaged in pacts sought selfish gain. Some claimed they pursued them for knowledge. Occult manuscripts often spoke of hidden sciences, alchemy, astrology, and even medicine offered by demons. The Ars Goetia describes spirits teaching philosophy, art, and the secrets of creation. In this sense, the demonic contract wasn't always about gold or lust, but about unlocking occult knowledge. Yet even here, the risk was absolute. For every seeker who claimed wisdom, another was driven to madness, destroyed by truths too heavy to bear. Knowledge, after all, can be as dangerous as any weapon. The cultural echoes of these infernal contracts spread widely. From Faust selling his soul for knowledge, to folk tales of men bargaining at crossroads, the idea of demonic pacts became embedded in European and later global imagination. These weren't just stories, they were reflections of what people feared was truly happening behind closed doors, with satanic rituals explained in obsessive detail. And whether or not these bargains were real, the fear was real enough to shape entire generations. Even today, music, film, and literature return to the theme, showing how deep the shadow of these black magic books still lingers. But perhaps the most unsettling part of these contracts was not the demons themselves, but the humans signing them. The seeker's willingness to gamble eternity for a few decades of power reveals something profound about human nature. These forbidden rituals weren't only about devil summoning, they were mirrors showing the extremes of ambition, fear, and desire. What we fear in Satanic Grimoires isn't only the demons, it's the reminder that under the right conditions, anyone might be tempted to sign on the dotted line. That temptation is timeless, whispering across centuries with the same lure. And so, as demonic pacts and infernal contracts spread through medieval grimoires, they deepened humanity's entanglement with forces it barely understood. The whispers of forbidden books became chains, binding men not only in ritual but in destiny. And once bound, the next step was inevitable. Confronting the full pantheon of spirits, the catalogue of names and powers preserved in the Ars Goetia, because every pact eventually led to the summoning of more, an entire court of 72 demons waiting for their turn to speak. If the Grand Grimoire was a contract, then the Ars Goetia was the directory. This section of the Lemegeton mapped out 72 demons in obsessive detail, describing their ranks, abilities, and the infernal seals needed to summon them. Imagine flipping through forbidden books and finding not vague myths, but structured profiles, like a catalogue of infernal executives. Each name carried weight: Baal, Astaroth, Asmodeus, and beyond. To the medieval seeker, this wasn't fantasy. It was a manual of interaction with beings that could change lives for better or worse. And that precision is what made the Ars Goetia one of the most terrifying grimoires of all time. Each of the 72 demons had its own personality, its own temptations, and its own dangers. Baal promised invisibility, a gift tempting for spies or thieves. Astaroth offered knowledge of the past and future, irresistible to scholars and rulers. Asmodeus could reveal treasures, fueling greed and obsession. These weren't random entities, they reflected humanity's deepest desires. The Lucifer grimoire tradition taught that demons didn't just exist outside, they echoed the hungers within us. Reading their names was like reading a map of ambition, lust, and fear, and with every invocation, the line between summoner and summoned blurred. The rituals of the Ars Goetia were exacting. Circles had to be drawn, candles lit, and invocations recited word for word. Any error risked disaster. Think of it like calling someone on a secret frequency. Dial one wrong number, and you might reach something else entirely. That's why occult manuscripts warned again and again about precision. These weren't playful experiments. They were serious engagements with forces that demanded respect. The infernal seals, the demonic invocations, even the timing of the rituals, all were part of a dangerous code. One slip, and the seeker could lose not just the ritual, but their sanity. The fascinating paradox is how much these rituals mirrored bureaucracy. Just as kings had courts, demons had hierarchies. Just as humans drafted contracts, so did the infernal. The Ars Goetia read like a demonic ledger, a mirror of earthly politics. A nobleman might command knights, Baal might command legions of spirits, a ruler might trade in gold, Asmodeus might trade in secrets. This structure gave Satanic grimoires an air of authority, as if the invisible world was as organized as the visible one. It reassured seekers that they weren't plunging into chaos but entering a system, albeit a deadly one. The stories of those who dared summon the 72 demons are as chilling as the rituals themselves. Some claimed success, boasting of riches or knowledge. Others vanished into obscurity, their names remembered only as cautionary tales. Secret occult societies passed these accounts like sacred relics, whispering which demons could be trusted and which must never be called. And the more these stories spread, the more the Ars Goetia became a central pillar of dark occult philosophy. It wasn't just another black magic book, it was the very foundation of demonic invocation, shaping everything that followed in witchcraft texts and satanic rituals explained across centuries. Even today, the Ars Goetia fascinates occultists and scholars alike. Its names echo through literature, music, and pop culture, proof of its enduring grip on imagination. But beneath the fascination lies fear. Because whether one believes in demons or not, the sheer detail, the obsessive structure, and the persistent testimonies make it impossible to dismiss entirely. That's the true power of these occult manuscripts. They blur the boundary between myth and manual, daring the reader to wonder, what if it really works? And so the Ars Goetia wasn't just a book. It was an initiation into a system where 72 demons waited to be called. But the story doesn't end with lists and names. Behind these grimoires, behind the rituals and pacts, were people, scribes, magicians, rebels, who risked everything to preserve or twist this forbidden knowledge. Their hidden hands shaped the survival of these satanic grimoires, and it's to those keepers of shadows, those secret occult societies, that we must now turn. Behind every grimoire, there was always a hand guiding it, copying it, or concealing it. Forbidden books didn't simply survive by chance. They were protected by secret occult societies that valued them as treasures. These groups, often shrouded in mystery, acted as both guardians and gatekeepers. Some whispered of Templars carrying fragments of black magic books alongside holy relics. Others spoke of clandestine brotherhoods that kept the Grand Grimoire and Le Dragon Rouge hidden, passing them only to initiates deemed worthy or dangerous enough. Without these hidden networks, the most terrifying grimoires might have vanished into ashes. Instead, they thrived in shadows. These societies didn't always look sinister. Some were made up of scholars, alchemists, or philosophers seeking knowledge beyond the Church's control. For them, occult manuscripts like the Book of Abramelin or the Devil's Bible weren't just tools for devil summoning. They were sources of wisdom, rivaling the Bible itself. Yet within those same libraries, rituals of demonic invocation were preserved with the same care as prayers. That duality defined the hidden hands. They saw no contradiction in copying psalms by day and infernal seals by night. Their secrecy was less about shame and more about survival in a world quick to burn heretics alive. Witchcraft texts often credit these societies with preserving knowledge that would have been lost forever. Imagine a monk secretly copying the Grimorium Verum by candlelight, knowing that discovery would mean death. He didn't see himself as evil, he saw himself as a custodian of occult knowledge too precious to let die. The paradox is haunting. The very men sworn to God often became the carriers of satanic grimoires. History isn't clean, it's messy, full of contradictions, and the survival of these forbidden books proves it. Hidden hands always held the pen, even when fire threatened the page. Over time, these secret occult societies grew into webs of influence, touching politics, art, and even war. Some rulers consulted them in secret, desperate for advantages only a Lucifer grimoire could offer. Others sought them out for forbidden rituals when crises struck. These weren't fringe characters in dusty cloaks. They were advisors, counselors, and sometimes puppeteers. Think of how intelligence agencies operate today, moving silently, shaping events without ever stepping into the light. That's what these hidden networks were to their time, invisible architects of history, using occult manuscripts as their blueprints. And just as the demons of the Ars Goetia had hierarchies, so did these groups. Initiation rites mirrored demonic pacts, pledges of loyalty, sacrifices, and oaths sealed in secrecy. To be part of such a brotherhood meant surrendering individuality for access to forbidden books. Knowledge was the bait, silence was the chain, and if you broke the chain, punishment was swift. The legends say some who betrayed their societies ended up cursed, hunted not only by men but by the very demons they had once invoked. Whether true or not, the fear was enough to keep mouths shut and manuscripts safe. The continuity is undeniable. From the medieval scribes to Renaissance magicians, from hidden lodges to modern circles, the hands have never stopped moving. That's why names like Lucifuge, Rofacal, Astaroth, and Asmodeus still echo today. The occult manuscripts didn't simply survive, they evolved, adapted, and embedded themselves into dark occult philosophy, ready to resurface whenever someone dares listen to the whispers of forbidden books. Each generation finds its seekers, and each seeker discovers that the shadows still hold libraries waiting to be opened. And so we end where we began, with the whisper of forbidden pages. Only now, that whisper is louder, shaped by centuries of sacrifice, visions, pacts, and guardianship. Satanic grimoires are more than relics. They are living chains of knowledge, carried by hidden hands and offered to those bold enough to read. But before one dares to open them, a question lingers like smoke. Are you the reader or the one being read? That, my friend, is where the real story begins, and why these are truly the most terrifying grimoires ever explained in obsessive detail. Now that you've walked through the shadows of these forbidden books, ask yourself, what would you do with knowledge like this? Would you dare to open the pages of the Grand Grimoire? Or whisper the names of the 72 demons from the Ars Goetia? Or would you turn away, knowing that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. These satanic grimoires aren't just relics of the past. They are mirrors of human desire, ambition, and fear. And the real question is, which reflection do you see staring back at you? Knowledge without action is nothing. So take this as a reminder. The most dangerous pacts we make aren't always with demons, they're with ourselves. In the choices we make every single day, what contract are you unconsciously signing right now? With your time, your habits, your beliefs? If forbidden books could shape empires and terrify priests, then your own rituals, your daily actions, can reshape your destiny. The real magic is in what you choose to do next. So tell me, if you could unlock one hidden truth about the universe, what would it be? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you're searching for. And if this journey through the most terrifying satanic grimoires explained in obsessive detail opened your eyes, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the shadows still hold secrets, and this is only the beginning.